Hi people, it's Archivist here, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about Control. Control is a game by Remedy that came out last year, and I can't believe how underrated and undervalued this game is. And I think it's just something to do with the fact that not enough people have played it to really appreciate how amazing this game really is. And I was wondering, what is it about this game that just didn't attract people? And I think it was two things. First of all, ahead of the game coming out, I don't think there was much publicity around what the game actually was. And secondly, and it's a simple thing but it matters, is the fact the game is quite simply called Control. And I think to a lot of people that sounds super generic, but the game could not be more unique, at least in terms of its setting. So I would like to do a little bit of a review on the game. It's been a while since I played the main story. I very recently did the Foundation DLC, but I'll try and go back and remember as much as I can. I can certainly talk about the best points because they really stick out to me. So in terms of the story, you play as a character called Jessie, and she's in search of her brother, and your search brings you to this building called the Oldest House. When you first walk into the building, things seem a bit eerie, but nothing is too strange. But then as you begin to search the building, just walking around, you start to see very bizarre things. You start to see these talking handguns, strange imagery, voices in your head talking to you, and people who seem to have been infested by some supernatural force. And the idea is that you are inexplicably appointed the director of this building, which is run by an organisation known as the Bureau. And the Bureau are this group of people that essentially are trying to study and contain supernatural events. And they'll study these items that have essentially been possessed and have strange qualities. And some of the items are so dangerous that they've led to some very adverse effects. Things like people being hypnotised or possessed or frozen. Very strange things, and the overall presentation of the game is incredibly unique. It's quite isolating in that you spend the whole game inside of a building, and at first that can sound like a downside because you think, oh, it doesn't that get old? But because of the supernatural element, you see such creative designs and warping of the overall architecture that it actually creates an incredibly unique game that can look very different level to level. It also has that sort of Metroidvania layout where it's not just a linear progression through the building. You actually go back and forth between different areas depending on the abilities you unlock, and that brings us onto the gameplay, which I really enjoy in this game, which essentially revolves around the fact that your character has telekinesis, which she gets from some of the objects she encounters in the building. And this telekinesis takes different forms, one of the core ones being the fact that you can simply lift objects up and then throw them at enemies. Another one being force push, you can levitate, you can pull objects in front of you and use them as a shield. And there's also, all behind this, an incredibly robust physics system where when you throw these rocks or these objects in the building, there's such a element of entropy as the buildings and the blocks all start to ripple and bounce off each other, which make it a lot more entertaining than some other games which do also have telekinesis, but I don't think I've ever seen it done so effectively where the physics system really complements the gameplay. The enemies you fight are called the Hiss. They're essentially these infested humans. And I will admit that is one downside of the gameplay where, because they all have this very generic red glowing design, you don't really get a sense of what they truly look like. Like, I can just see a big red glowing human, but I sometimes don't really appreciate what I'm fighting. So when I defeat them in combat, it doesn't feel as effective as if I was fighting just a regular human. I would definitely say that. And it makes me really want Remedy to find a way to get this telekinesis combat system into a game with more traditional enemies, if they can find a way to do that. You've also got something called the service weapon, which is a gun that can take on different forms, which allows it to fulfill different archetypes. It can be just a standard handgun firing semi-automatic rounds. It can be a little machine gun. It can be a shotgun. It can fire like sniper shots. And it's a good way of making sense of the fact that you are one person, but you're holding this massive arsenal of different kinds of weapons. You can also upgrade Jessie's abilities as you go out throughout the game, which is very fun because you start off quite weak, but as you get more powerful, you can really hit enemies incredibly hard when you're throwing stuff at them. You can even weaken them and then pick the enemies themselves up and then throw them at other enemies. It becomes very dynamic. I will say that sometimes in certain fights it can get almost overly chaotic and I can start to lose sense of what's really going on, but I think that's just what you get if you have such an ambitious and different combat system. And it would be a shame, I really think it would be a shame if this combat system ends with this game, because it's so fun and so different that I want to see it in other games. I really don't care if they milk it a little bit, because this is a combat system that sort of deserves to get a little bit more life out of it. In terms of the graphics, you can see for yourself they are very, very impressive. They particularly lend themselves well to the overall tone of the game, where it's not a horror game, and yet it has some very effective horror elements purely down to the atmosphere, and the quality of the visuals and the lighting very much play a strong role in that. I think the biggest weakness of the graphics would have to be the human character models. Sometimes they can look a bit stiff, particularly when they're talking, a little bit supernatural themselves, even though that is something that shouldn't look supernatural. But yeah, the graphics in this game do look very impressive. What you're seeing here is the Xbox One X version of the game. In terms of lasting appeal, I'd say this is the game's weakness. Once you've gone throughout the building, completed the main quest, and then also done the side missions, it can feel a bit boring to just walk around the building with not too much to do other than just fight random enemies that appear. There are the DLC aspects that are coming in. There's a DLC at the moment called Foundation, and there's another DLC coming out later this month. So they are adding to this game, but I would definitely say that of the 4 main aspects that I review a game, story, gameplay, graphics, and lasting appeal would be the Achilles heel of Control. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get it, because just because a game doesn't have hours and hours, like hundreds of hours of content, doesn't mean it's a bad game. It just means it's a focused game, and there's absolutely a case for Control. So yeah, this is a game that unfortunately did go under the radar. Not a lot of people played it, not a lot of people even know about it, but I can promise you that this game really is something special, and I wish I hadn't waited till now to talk about it. The reason I'm talking about it now is because I saw a recent announcement for the next set of DLC, and it made me think, oh yeah, Control, I haven't played that in a while, and I realised there was a DLC I hadn't played, and as I was playing through it, I was thinking to myself, wow, this game did not get the attention it deserved. So I hope more people try it out and play it. It is available on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation 4, so on multiple platforms. A fantastic experience. In terms of atmosphere, it's incredibly unique and a great combat system. As always, people, thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.